Gosh, oh, hello, welcome. You all are the sweetest. For anyone who doesn't know what's going on in the comments, my name is Melanie Naranjo. I head up the people team at Ethena, and I was recently promoted to Chief People Officer after 3 years at the company, and it was wonderful, and I'm so grateful, and I feel so appreciative of everything that you all have taught me, everything that my team and my amazing CEO has taught me, and it's just been a really wonderful, humbling, encouraging, empowering experience. So thank you all. If you don't know me and you don't know what's going on, just ignore this. But for everyone, I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate it. The love on LinkedIn was overwhelming, and I actually didn't know how to respond. So I've just been sitting here, kind of like. So, anywho, hello. Oh, this is not about me. Hi. Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am so excited for this webinar. For anyone who's brand new to us, my name is Melanie Naranjo. As I said, I head up the people team at Ethena. We are a compliance training company. We do everything from compliance training like harassment prevention and code of conduct, all the way to hotline and case management, workplace investigation tools. And so one of the things that we realize in building this wonderful company is that a lot of HR people are kind of working solo, don't have a ton of support, don't have a ton of resources, don't have a space to talk to each other, to vent, to problem solve, to talk about some tricky things like what we're going to talk about today in a second. And so we like to partner with other HR partners and legal experts like Lisa, who I'm going to introduce in a second, to make sure that we are building that community for you all and providing resources, the kind of resources that, quite frankly, I wish I had when I first joined HR and had to do my first employee investigation and was like, wait, what do you mean I'm just going to investigate someone now? I've never done this before, taken a class. What's going on? And so I really encourage you in the comments. If you're new, we are very active in the comments. People make best friends in the comments. They share their own tips and resources in the comments. I'm going to be using the comments to talk to you all. So please leverage it, talk to each other, build community, connect with each other on LinkedIn afterwards. This is your space to create that community and support. So let's kick it off. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about what I think is a pretty scary topic, to be honest, that I had never previously talked about. And I was like, why don't we? The reality that sometimes we make mistakes. I don't know about you all, but I have definitely looked back at my career and been like, oh, that was illegal, or like, oh, I was supposed to offer that thing and I didn't know I was supposed to, or like, oh, maybe we should have made sure to include that in the offer letter. And so we want to make sure that we just put it out there. Some of the top legal slip-ups that people make in HR, and who better to talk to than an employment lawyer who gets called in to all the tea and all the drama. So that's what we're talking about today. It is my great honor and privilege to introduce Lisa Horgan. She's an amazing employment lawyer who works at Littler. Shout out, give some love for Littler in the comments, by the way, if you've ever partnered with Littler, if you're like, Littler saved my life, just give a little +1, a little heart in the comments so we can see all the Littler love. Yeah, oh my gosh, I don't know, Lisa, if you're seeing this, but all the reactions, that's for Littler right there.
Oh, that's
Yeah. So thank you all. Lisa, you and I have partnered in the past in webinars. You have such wildly amazing advice. I know you partner closely with us on things. And so tell the audience a little bit about yourself before we jump in. Who are you? What are you doing? How'd you get here? Let's chat.
Thank you, Melanie. I'm super excited to be with you today, and I've been with you one time before, and like you always have the most amazing audience, so it's always really fun. And yeah, so I'm an employment attorney. I'm based out of San Francisco. I'm with the firm Littler. I've been an employment attorney for about 15 years and seen so many situations in that time. I began my career as a litigator. So like I handled lawsuits and I defended employers in court. And then after about 12 years, I took all that knowledge and transitioned to just advising employers on these situations when they come up before they become lawsuits, and trying to prevent them from becoming lawsuits, or making sure that you're in the best possible situation to defend if there is a lawsuit. But always the goal is to avoid it. And so, yeah, I get to work with all sorts of great employers on, issues from investigations and terminations and disability accommodation and leaves of absence and all sorts of stuff. So, I get to work with all sorts of great people all day.
Amazing. One day we have to do a webinar where you just tell us all about your actual like litigations in court. I was talking to a couple of lawyers the other day. It sounds wild.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, and employment litigation is kind of like extra wild because it's like so personal. Like, there's people who do like the business litigation and like mergers and acquisitions and all that stuff, but like this is like real people's real emotions and getting involved at all times.
Yeah. Oh boy. That's another webinar. We'll just do a
Yep.
podcast. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great.
Yeah.
Okay, all. Well, with that said, let's kick it off. As we mentioned, we're going to be talking about top legal slip ups. We'll talk about how to navigate complex legal requirements, why documentation is key. We'll do a fun Ethena spotlight at the end. This is going to be a surprise, all. I'm trying something new. I'm excited. Cheer for me or let me know if you don't like it, okay? And then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. The disclaimer, of course, is that you please do not take anything that we are saying today as legal advice, because Lisa cannot give you legal advice unless she is actually a lawyer that you have, retained and are paying for, because she doesn't know the nuances of your circumstances. We are giving a high level tips and advice. Lisa, is there anything else I need to say there to make sure that we do not put you in hot water here?
Nope, that's perfect. I mean, I think that you all know as HR professionals, like the devil is in the details for all of these situations. So everything we're talking about today is general, and your particular situations, there may be details and facts that like make all the difference. So, yep, all good, Melanie.
Lovely. Okay, we're going to kick it off with my favorite, a little pulse check to see how the team is doing, everybody in the audience, okay? I got a question for you all when you're ready in the comments. Oh, I forgot to say this. For anybody who's new, I do call on people who respond. So if you don't want to be called on, I don't want that to be a deterrent to you participating. Just put an asterisk next to your response, and that will be my cue not to call on you, okay? So don't worry, you can still participate. Just put an asterisk and I won't call on you. But if you don't put an asterisk, know that I might call on you, and be prepared to unmute yourself. Ace in the background will give you unmute access, okay? All right, with that said, question for you all. On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being agree, 1 disagree, how much do you agree with the following statement? I feel like a total legal expert. 5, I'm a boss. Lisa, I should be doing your job. Get out of this call. I could be partnering with Melanie right now. Okay, I'm not seeing any 5s. I'm not seeing any 5s. Lisa, what are you seeing any 5s? What
I
are
just
you?
don't want to be rude to me.
Oh, they just want to be rude to you. Right. I shouldn't have framed it that way. That's fair. That's fair. Oh, this is amazing. Yeah, I would be like a sub 100, to be honest. And I've been in HR for over a decade, working quite legally complex things. Sub 100 would be my response. I'm going to call on somebody who did not put an asterisk. Let's do Lena Tang. Well, yeah, I will do Lena Tang because you give it 3, and that's interesting. Lena, if you could unmute yourself, tell me a little bit more about why you feel like a 3. Why is this your answer? I'll give you a quick second. If you don't start chatting, I'll assume technical difficulties on calling someone else. Okay, we're going to try. No worries, Lena. We'll go back to you. Let's try Gina Gilbert. Gina, Gina Gilbert. You gave a 1, which is closer to what I would give. If you could unmute yourself, tell me a little bit about why this is a 1 for you.
Hi.
Hi.
I feel like it was a 1 just because, yes, I know the basics of laws, but nowhere near am I a legal expert. So I can give, like I said, help them with the basics of laws and what they entail and everything, but there's nowhere near I'm an expert.
Okay, Gina, let me ask you just a couple of quick follow-up questions, if you don't mind. 1, how many legally nuanced things in your HR career? Actually, let me make that easier. Do you feel like you have partnered on a lot of legally nuanced things over the course of your HR career? Like, is that a thing you've had to do?
Yes and no. I mean, I've done lawsuits and stuff like that. So obviously partnering with legal on that.
Gina,
But
I don't know where your no is coming from. That sounds like a hard yes. That sounds like a hard yes. So my follow-up question to you, and then I'll let you go, Gina. I'll stop putting you on the spot. All right.
Yeah.
But my follow-up question to you is, how much legal training have you received as an HR person, HR professional who's been assigned and tasked with all these legally nuanced things? How much training have you received? How much have you gone to law school? Has anybody given you a course on like legally nuanced employee investigation? No, none. None. No, none. Okay. In the comments, can I get a +1 if you also have never received any formal legal training, even though you had to do all these legally okay. So Gina, thank you so much for sharing. You
You're
are not
welcome.
alone. Of course. I hope that these +1s give you some sense of community here. Okay. Lisa, question for you.
Yes.
Goes through your mind as an employment lawyer who partners with HR people who are tasked with running a lot of these things, even if they're not the lawyer, they're running point. Like, do you feel like throwing up when you think about the fact that we're doing this without training? Like, what is this catch you by surprise?
I mean, that's the thing, is like, maybe it made me feel like throwing up like the first time I heard about it, but at this point it's like old hat. Like I work directly with a ton of HR folks. I work because I work with like huge companies that have huge legal departments, but I also work with a lot of small companies that may not even have any in-house attorneys. And so I'm working directly with, HR folks. And I know that many of you are asked to do, handle these like very legally nuanced issues without any formal training. And I feel for you, and I'm happy to be able to partner with the folks who reach out to me.
All right. Well, you know what? I have to say, I hope that gives you some sense of comfort that Lisa, who is the lawyer, is like, it's okay, all. This is a part of the norm. And part of what is expected is that you supplement some of that knowledge with a legal expert. So, Lisa, I'd like to jump in. It's Halloween month. I think we got to get a little spooky here. And quite frankly, I don't know about other HR people, but I'm here for the tea half the time. So I want to start with just a little bit of tea since we get an inside glimpse talking to you on the employment legal side. Can you tell us, without sharing any confidential info, of course, can you tell us about an example or two of a really serious issue someone ran into due to a misunderstanding or lack of awareness around employment law? And before you jump in, I just want to say for everyone in the comments, I'm not doing this to put anyone on the spot or make anyone feel bad. I'm actually doing this to hopefully give everyone some comfort that you are not alone. And we have all made some mistakes, and probably your mistakes aren't the worst that they could have been. And so, Lisa, with that in mind, I'd love to know, what are some horror stories that you've had to help work through?
Yeah, so one example that was kind of like a perfect storm of HR being unaware of obligations and management being unaware of obligations. I had a matter where an employee, like, it was a very friendly workplace, right? And so like employees were friends with HR folks, employees were friends with their managers, things like that. And so an employee had spoken with her friend in HR and said that she had issues with a coworker who was like making inappropriate comments to her. But she told her friend, who was in HR, that she didn't want HR to intervene. She was like, let me try to handle it by myself, right? And so this, HR person wasn't thinking what their HR had on necessarily, and they were like, okay, and they just like let it go. And they never followed up with her even to like check in and be like, hey, were you able to resolve that issue? Turns out she was not able to resolve that issue, and that the behavior had actually even like just gotten worse. Like it went from inappropriate comments to inappropriate touching. Like it just got worse. And like I said, it was like a super friendly workplace, right? And so this employee was in a friend group with the coworker who was a problem, and with their mutual manager. And so the manager had like a front seat to the coworker's bad behavior and was just like, oh, well, that's just, we'll call the bad coworker Brian, right? He's like, oh, well, that's just Brian. That's just how Brian is, right? So in this case, we had both HR and management on notice of this coworker's bad behavior, and no one was like supporting the employee or putting a stop to the behavior. So eventually the employee is just like, I can't deal with this anymore, calls the company's ethics hotline and submits like a formal complaint. And then HR is just like super overloaded. And so the investigation doesn't even begin for like 2 months. And in that time, the coworker is continuing bad behavior and driving this poor employee crazy. And, because the coworker has been allowed to stay in the workplace. And this continues basically, the investigation starts, but mid-investigation, the employee resigns because she's just like, I can't take this anymore. So as you can imagine, that was not an inexpensive situation for the company to resolve.
Holy cow. I have questions for you, Lisa, but before I do, I'm just curious to get a gut check in the comments. Give me a +1 if you have ever either had a situation where you had the boundaries between like being someone's HR partner and being their coworker friend get blurred, or two, where you just like are in a place now where you're like, I don't even want to be friends with anybody at work. I just don't, it's too complicated. Yeah. Yeah, this is a very real thing. And I will say, I do think I have a different relationship with my coworkers than most people do with their coworkers. And I'm okay with that, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think employment lawyers reach that point too. Like I have a lot of friends and former colleagues who are in-house employment lawyers, and like, you start out being friendly with everybody, and then eventually you're just like, I need a level of separation.
It just doesn't work. So, wow. Okay. So I want to dig in because I think this is a really great example because it's so relatable. Like it's just like this thing that seemed, innocuous to begin with, right? In fact, it seemed like you were trying to be helpful to the person and then it kind of spiraled. I'm curious to know if this is the norm, or if sort of like this is where you see most issues happening. And if not, what legal areas are you seeing trip up HR professionals the most? Is it stuff like this, the lines between HR and employees being blurred? Is it, leave, investigations, reasonable accommodations, performance? Like, what are you seeing right now as the trends?
Yeah, so I mean, I think leaves and investigations are like a perpetual kind of area of issues popping up. And performance management definitely too, but like performance is a little bit less of an area because like in general, there's no one legally required way to deal with performance, right? But like in areas like leave and investigations, and like particularly in that case I was telling you about where like there were investigations issued, the HR employee potentially should have kicked off an investigation in the first place to deal with it, all that sort of stuff. I think that what those areas kind of have in common is that they're the intersection of a bunch of different legal obligations and like, trying to understand federal law and state law and local law and different legal areas. And then also like areas where you may be getting pressure from the business to behave in ways that are not necessarily compliant with the law.
Oh, we are going to dig into that one. Yeah. Don't you worry, all. We're going to talk about both these. So tricky. It's so true, right? Because you can know the letter of the law, and it doesn't mean that you have the power to pursue it within your company, even as HR. I'm curious to know, you were talking about all sort of the complexities of like state versus federal. In the comments, can I get like a quick pulse check just to understand the demographic of who's on the call here? Who has employees at their company across more than 3 states, for example? Give me a +1 if you've got. Okay, we've got a lot. I'm just going to throw this out there because I feel like this comes up for a lot of people. Lisa, as an employment lawyer, and we talked about this even on the prep call, I like had a question and Lisa was like, well, I'm not a New York attorney. And I was like, oh, crap. So I'm curious, Lisa, what advice do you have for HR partners who have employees represented across a large number of states and are trying to stay compliant with all the various laws?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like first things first, if you're dealing with an issue, like a particular issue, find out where that employee is located, because that like you are often dealing with layers of federal law, state law, and then depending on the situation, like local law too. So like I saw a lot of comments pop up, people saying that they're dealing with like ADA issues and FMLA issues and sick leave and all that sort of stuff. And that's one of those areas where like there can actually be like city specific laws that you need to be aware of. And so, I think that there's 2 different pieces, right? There's kind of like trying to maintain continuous education, but you are one person and you can't possibly know everything. And then there's also just like, do consult with legal experts if you can, whether that be in-house, if you're at a company that does have in-house legal, or with outside counsel. And a lot of what I do, like I do like tons of like 15-minute, 20-minute calls with people who are just like, is this an issue? Like I have this problem with this employee in this place. Like, do I even need to be talking to you? And like sometimes the answer is no, and I'll just be like, you don't even need to be talking to me. Like, this is fine. Like, and go and do what you wanted to do. And sometimes it's like, actually, like, this is a complex web of all of these different laws, and we're going to work through it together.
Fascinating. So, okay. Here's what I want to dig into. I think something I'm hearing throughout your responses is obviously one, the complexity, and two, the fact that like there are different things that are impacting how complex something might be. It could be cultural dynamics, it could be relationship dynamics, right? It could be state dynamics. I want to talk about one of the things that I think is the trickiest and quite frankly, the least fun of all of this, which is I want to talk about documentation. We got a lot of questions in the registration around like the very specific, like, what do I need to document? How much do I need to document? And we'll get into that in a little second. But I'm curious to know, because I'm gonna be honest for you all. Is it fun for me to have to document every single thing? No, it is not. In fact, can I get a +1 in the comments if you also are just like, what the heck do I have to document? Like, how often do I have to? Who do I have to share it with? Okay, yes, it's not just me. So I'm glad we're gonna spend a good chunk of time talking about this. And I will say that, at previous companies, it was quite frankly, it was just like Google Docs. It was, like, I don't know, I have something in a one-on-one, it's there if we need it. If somebody, tries to sue us, I guess I'll like go and like pull things up. And it was quite complicated. And it wasn't until I joined Ethena, because we're a compliance company, and it's like, well, Melanie, you better be on it. You can't just use Google Docs. It wasn't until I joined Ethena that, I started actually documenting everything all in one place. We luckily have an internal case management tool, so I can just track it, and I'll show you all later. But it wasn't until then that I was like, oh, okay, we can get everything in one place. I'm curious to know from your perspective, Lisa, because I want to acknowledge the HR perspective here, which is sometimes it's like, I'm too busy. I don't have time. This is not that important. I will wait till it becomes a fire to like get all my ducks in a row and document things. I'm curious to know from your perspective, how risky is that? Like, how important is documentation? And if it is important, like, what does good documentation look like?
Yeah, I mean, documentation is incredibly important. Like, if you ever hear me in other trainings and things like that, I'm always like, document. Like, it's when it comes to like when it gets to us, when it becomes a lawsuit, like, heaven forbid, right? We don't want it to ever get there. But if it does, unfortunately, what the people who are going to be judging your actions are going to be looking at, like, they tend to find it much more credible and believable if there is a document to show that something happened versus a person saying that something happened, right? So like, if you had a conversation with an employee, you may remember that conversation perfectly, but like, if you took notes, like just like, notes on a scratch pad, even just like, talk to this employee about this thing on this date. If you still have those notes, they're gold, And so like, obviously we all want like the perfect documentation, but that's not necessarily going to exist in every situation. And having the documentation to begin with is like the key step.
Okay, I'm going to get like really in the weeds here, because I have found over the course of these webinars that these really in the weeds questions are actually the things that people really want, because they're like, yeah, but what about this? I'm curious to know, okay, so like you documented a thing, you have it in a doc, right? Like, how important is it, like, who you give access to, like transferring the data when you leave the company? Like walk me through some of the nuances of like, okay, understanding document is important. Like, what does good documentation look like?
Yeah, I mean, good documentation, like, I think a good rule of thumb is to think about the purpose of the document. Like, why are you writing this down? Who is potentially going to look at this in the future? And think about, whether someone who is not involved in the situation could look at it and understand what you're trying to communicate and like what's been done about a situation, right? And so, like, for example, like investigation documentation, that's like tends to be a bit more formal, but sometimes you're like doing what we call like a little I investigation into something that doesn't seem like it's like touching the law. It's just like maybe two employees are going at it, right? And it turns into a big I investigation. And so the documentation that you've been doing along the way sort of matters a bit more. And so, it really depends on the purpose of the documentation. But my rule of thumb is always, could someone with like a bit of education about like what your company does in this situation? Could they look at it and understand why does this document exist? What is it trying to communicate to me?
Okay, Lisa, we are getting some gold questions in the comments, so I'm going to deviate from our plan a little bit and just ask these because they seem really great. We have one question from Kemi, which is, what form of documentation is legally admissible? Will a Slack chat be admissible? You talk about notepads, like tell me.
Oh yeah, I mean, Slack chats fully admissible. I mean, there are standards of evidence, right? Like that have to be met and in order to like authenticate something. But like in terms of whether whether your texts, whether your Slack chats, whether your emails, obviously, like all of that can come into play. And all of that can be admissible in a case.
Okay. Building off that, I'm curious to know, you were asking the question like, okay, who could potentially need this information in the future, so on and so forth. How do you make sure you're documenting effectively? Like if you put notes on a scratch pad, but you don't include any like dates or something like that, is that suddenly like not helpful? Like what are the things that you should be including as you track things?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a perfect question. And I actually saw a comment from somebody pop up where they said that they ask managers to email themselves. And I think that's a great idea. I mean, honestly, like I kind of do that for myself with my own notes. They ask managers just to email themselves like a notes of a meeting. And because that shows the date, that shows who, it's hard to disprove where that came from, right? And I think that's great. But just generally, again, it kind of depends on what the documentation is, right? But it's the classic like who, what, when, where, why, that you always want to make sure is covered.
Interesting. Okay. One more follow-up question. I don't know. We'll see. These keep coming in their beauties. When you say document everything, what exactly does that mean? Do you mean even like an informal 30-day pulse check where somebody alludes to the fact that somebody is underperforming, for example, or okay, I have an interesting one, okay, that I'd love your take on, okay? I feel like I see and I hear this all the time. A manager and a direct report are having a very casual conversation, and in passing, the direct report mentions, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's just my ADD. It's always getting in the way of this," or like, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's just I'm a little neurodivergent, and so like this, and that," or like, "Oh, I know I've been having some back pain, so I didn't get," and suddenly it's like, is it fire alarms or is it not fire alarms? Do I document this? Do I not document? What do you mean when you say document?
So I guess I mean, if you think it might be relevant in the future, so like performance issues are key, right? Like if you start to become aware of performance issues, like if it's at the very beginning and it's 30 days in and you're like, this may or may not be any big thing, like you don't need to go, whole hog on like putting like, writing up like every single thing that was discussed, right? But it would be a good idea. And I think, HR folks are used to keeping notes and documenting things, and it can be informal, but like in your running notes on this employee or in your running notes of 30-day check-ins or whatever, like just like a couple of words, a sentence, just something that we as lawyers can point back to and be like, look, this was being noticed even back then, right? Just something. But then to like talk about your example of a neurodivergent employee, like just mentioning it in passing. So one of the areas that I kind of specialize in is disability accommodation. And I think, and we've, post-pandemic, I think we've been seeing more and more mental health issues come up, right? Like people with anxiety about returning to the workplace and things like that. And one thing that I always try to remind people is that just because someone is neurodivergent doesn't mean that they need a workplace accommodation. Like plenty of people who have, like, who are neurodivergent or have various mental health conditions or things like that, like they generally function just fine and they don't need your help, right? And so if you assume right off the bat that they do without them saying anything or without anything to indicate that they need your help, like it's actually kind of like infantilizing in a way, you know what I mean? Now, if that is mentioned in passing and you know that the employee is having performance issues, that seems like it might be related to that, right? Like maybe the employee's missing meetings or like missing details in documents or whatever. And they've said in passing, oh, I have ADD. The way you deal with it isn't really much different than the way that I would recommend dealing it with any employee who's having performance issues when you talk about it with them for the first time, which is you tell them what the performance issues are and you ask them, what can we do to help you succeed in meeting these standards? And that leaves the door open for them to tell you, like, hey, I have ADHD. I could really use these specific things to help me meet those standards. Or they might say, I have what I need, I'm good. And that basically you're giving them an opportunity to tell you that they need help because of that, but you're not forcing it upon them or making assumptions.
So here's what I love about what you just shared is that I think sometimes when the law gets involved, there's sort of like this instinct or this desire to have it be like very black and white. And I'll put this in like very HR terms so that everybody can relate to this. It's like compensation, right? Like everybody wishes there was just like a dollar amount that like you just know this is the dollar amount everyone should be paid. But we know there's more nuance to compensation and salary bands. You kind of like you figure them out. You learn market data. You adjust over time. What I'm hearing is that it's similar when it comes to the law, right? Like everything is context-based, using your judgment. And so just because somebody uses a word like neurodivergence or expresses that they have back pain doesn't necessarily mean, boom, that's your trigger. But if you have additional context, such as there are ongoing performance issues, such as they are coming late to work every day, right? Now, using your judgment, you should start to document some stuff. Is that like, is that an accurate understanding?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I saw some comments pop up where they were saying, that I'm not saying that you can't ask an employee if they happen to mention that they're neurodivergent, if they need accommodations, you can. But I'm just saying that you don't have to. And sometimes it may be really just going a bit too far, right? And I have actually seen situations where that comes back to bite an employer, where an employee, who is neurodivergent and didn't need any accommodations, I have seen cases where HR folks go too far and are basically kind of like insisting, like, no, we need to help you. And the employee comes back to say, like, actually, they kept harassing me about this and they kept bugging me about this. And actually, this is disability discrimination, or this is perceived disability discrimination.
That is fascinating, and I think such a powerful story to share because, again, I do think there can be this understandable from a place of fear instinct to over-index on like prescriptiveness and trigger words. And actually, like we still have to use the human element and the sort of like general good instincts approach when navigating these things. I'm going to pivot us over to the next question just because I'm looking at the clock and I want to make sure we get through as much as possible. You touched on something, Lisa, that I think a lot of people it's probably close to a lot of people here. And I'm going to do a quick gut check in the comments. Give me a +1 in the comments if part of your struggle has ever been not a lack of understanding around the law, but a lack of leadership buy-in in adhering to the law. And so, for example, maybe you're seeing toxic behavior and you should do something about it, but the leadership team is like, it's not that big of a deal, or there are key players, so we're going to let it go, or I'm not completing this training, I'm too busy. Okay, I'm seeing a lot. Okay. Wow, Lisa, first question is, does this surprise you at all? Like they're still coming in. That's how many people this resonates with.
Yeah, no, I mean, doesn't surprise me at all. Like, I think that legal, like HR, is kind of viewed by many folks in the business like it's a support function, right? And like they're trying to like focus on, we're here to do the business, we're here to make money, right? And so for a lot of folks, that is really not a priority. Or they may have it's just not a priority for them, right? And so that can be part of my job as well, where I'm really trying to like work with leadership to help them understand like why this is important and why you need to take a certain action.
I'm curious to know if you could share an example of like a tricky situation where you were partnering with an HR person and they were like, here's a situation and I'm not getting by and I don't know what to do. And like, what advice did you give them? Like, how do you get them to partner with leadership? And what are the risks if leadership doesn't partner with them and just lets it continue?
Yeah, I mean, the risks depend on what the situation is, right? But like, I mean, I've seen situations where it's classic, right? Where you get an allegation of some kind against some sort of key player or an executive, and everyone's just like, oh, we don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole, right? And what I always have to help people understand, and sometimes I often encourage the people I work with, like, bring me in as the bad cop. I can be the bad cop, you know? Like, I can be the lawyer who's like, this is how much it's going to cost you if you don't deal with this. Like, and these are going to be the consequences. But, you know, I think the way that I look at it when I'm talking to leadership is like, what is it that they value? Because I think a lot of what I do and a lot of what you all do is understanding human behavior, right? Understanding what makes people tick and how to help them get to where you need them to get to. And so, like, think about your leadership as humans and like what motivates them as a human, right? So is it like, are they somebody who cares a lot about fairness? So then you might approach a situation with perspective of like, look, we need to have like a precedent that we set here. And the precedent that we set here is what we need to do like in other situations going forward. So I understand in this particular situation, like, this is somebody who you may be close with and who you may believe that like could never do what they're being accused of, but like next time it might happen with somebody else. And we, in this situation, if we just let it go by and we, you know, didn't deal with it, we're setting a bad precedent for the next time when it does occur. Or like maybe they're focused on image, right? Like they're focused on like what people think of them, what people think of the company. Then you might focus on like, what are the negative PR aspects going to be if we don't deal with this and it comes out? Like, do you want to be the headline on TechCrunch? I don't, you know? And so I think thinking about what it is that motivates your leadership and trying to like reframe what you're doing can help.
I love that so much. I think, I mean, listen, granted, Ethena is in a pretty unique spot because we are literally a compliance trading company. So, like, can you imagine if we were on the front page news for like compliance? I would die. I would die. But we always ask the question whenever we're doing a thing and it's like a tricky situation and we're like struggling to get alignment. We always ask the question, okay, if this ended up on the front page of the New York Times, could we justify this? And would be comfortable justifying it? And if the answer is no, then we're like, all right, let's revisit, because that is sort of the litmus test, right? I will say also from an HR perspective, there were two things that you said in particular that stood out to me that I have found really effective when partnering with leadership team members. One is the cost. And so like putting it in terms of money, I think, listen, I want to have all the empathy in the world for like CEOs and leadership teams when they get stuck in the weeds of like, but this person's making us so much money, right? And so, and you're talking about emotions and fluffy things. The reality is we're not talking about emotions and fluffy things, right? But that's not always clear. And so we need to articulate that. The reality is we're talking about like financial impact to business. It will cost us $100,000 to pay all the legal fees and investigation fees and the hours that we're going to have. Yeah. Or more, right? Or more, right? If this goes south. And so that is what we're talking about, right? Not to mention, of course, the loss of like the loss of money from like productivity and people quitting and all that stuff. But like literally just in legal fees, that's how expensive it is. And so that can often help sort of like put people in the right direction, make sure that your CEO feels confident that you are thinking about this from a budgetary perspective, the way that they are as well. The second thing I will say, Lisa, is, and I'm just gonna say a really tough thing. I don't know if it's gonna land super well, but I think it's important sometimes to acknowledge the tough things. The reality is external experts always hold a higher, CEOs and leadership teams will always hold higher outside experts in higher regard than internal experts. And I don't say that. I don't say that because the internal expert isn't an expert. It's like anyone. You hear someone on a podcast and you're like, well, they were on a podcast. They must be real geniuses to have gotten on that podcast. And don't get me wrong, Lisa, you are a genius and an expert and you know way more than me. But what I'm trying to make is sometimes what you'll find is you and the external lawyer you hired are actually aligned. And the same advice you just gave is the same advice the lawyer gave, but your CEO is not going to believe you until they hear it from the lawyer or the outside expert. And so sometimes the best choice is to decide, hey, I understand that they're going to need a second opinion. They're going to need an outside expert. Let me bring that in so that we can move this along more quickly versus me going back and forth and in circles with them. I'm curious to know, Lisa, I saw a lot of nodding. Like, have you seen this a lot where like you and the HR partner are in lockstep and it's not
100%.
it, right? Until finally they're like, okay, I guess we'll do that.
Yeah. Like I probably more often than not, like HR folks come to me and they're like, here's the situation, here's what I want to do, and here's the pushback I'm getting. And I'm like, no, what, you're 100% right. Like if you need me to get on a call with whoever, like I'm happy to do it and talk to them about all the horror stories I've seen when they do things the way that they want to do. And I don't have to tell them that you and I talked about like, you know, what, like the pushback that you're getting, we can frame this organically. But like that all the time.
So Lisa, before I switch us over, this has been such a great conversation. I personally got a ton out of this. Before I switch us over into Q&A, I have one last question for you, which is, the focus of this webinar was really about like common legal slip-ups that HR people make. We talked about a few of them. Are there any final thoughts or tips that you have for HR professionals who are looking to stay on the right side of the law, who are looking to stay up to date, who are looking to avoid some of these very common mistakes? Any resources or tips that you have?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, obviously, like plug for Littler a little bit. Like, if you sign up at our website, you can get, we do like newsletters and news flashes and in-depth analysis of new laws and trends that we're seeing and all that sort of stuff. You can get right to your inbox. And when you sign up, you can say like, I'm only interested in these states or I'm only interested in these topics. And so you're not getting a million emails, right? We also host a lot of good webinars on like changes in the law and topics that are particularly timely. So like, next week on Halloween, some of my colleagues are doing a webinar on the spooky topic of politics in the workplace. And so, I know that's an area that like a ton of employers are struggling with, particularly right now. And then, lastly, I would just say, like, if you do have counsel that you work with on employment issues, like reach out to them and find out what resources they may be able to share with you. So like, for example, like our clients, we have this portal called Littler Edge. And it has like template documents and 50 state surveys and in-depth guides on like, on like each state's law and like various topics and all that sort of stuff. And so your counsel that your firm already works with may have something like that, or they may be able to share various guidance documents that they just have with you that they may not like never have thought to send to you. And if they don't, you know where to find me.
So excited, Lisa. Thank you so much for sharing. We will definitely be sharing that resource out with everybody. I think it will be so helpful. Thank you. Again, we love Littler. We're so excited to be partnering with you and all the future webinars with you all. So with that said, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to pivot into Q&A in a quick second, but I actually wanted to do something that I've never done before on one of these webinars because I realized that I think for anyone, and I saw this in a few of the comments, some of you all were asking about this, like what is a tool where you can track stuff like this? I'm gonna be honest and like vulnerable for a second and share that like before joining a compliance training company, like I had never used one before. Like I only ever tracked things in Google Docs or in notepads, and it was a mess. And I'll be honest, when I left companies, there was not like a clear transition between all the documents that I had and the person who was taking over for me, or when I got promoted and then another HRBP then took over that particular business unit. I did not transfer anything over. And so when things came up, they maybe didn't know that somebody had already had a history of issues because I hadn't mentioned it to them. I didn't think to do so. I didn't know where to track all the stuff. Whenever something came up, it would take us hours to track everything down. And so I want to share with you all, for anybody who's sort of like, wait, what? There's another option? I didn't even know. If you're like me, which that was me 3 years ago, there are other options. And so I want to show you an example of what that could look like. And yes, of course, I'm going to show you the Ethena one because that's what we use internally at Ethena. So don't worry, I'll be quick. It'll be like 3 minutes or less, and then we'll move it along to Q&A. But I wanted to give a quick snapshot for anyone who's maybe thinking about this and doesn't know what that looks like in practice. So let me make sure I'm sharing the right one. Lisa, can you confirm for me? Are you seeing Hey There Ethena demo? Okay, cool. So Thank you. Again, I promise I'll keep this quick. I want to make sure we answer tons of questions, but this is our demo page. So this is like if you had, our full suite of trainings and hotline and our investigation tool and all that stuff. But basically what you would do, and you can buy any of these tools separate. So let's say you just wanted our case management tool. Our case management tool looks like this. And it has a file and incident log as well, of course, because that is legally required for anyone who's got California employees. So if you need that, hit us up. But here's the beauty of something like this, is that everything can be in one place, assigned to different people with different access. Let me show you very briefly what it would look like and how I track things, to have it all in one place and then not have to worry about like who gets access afterwards and like, is it all in one place and blah, blah, blah. So very easily you could just add a report. And forgive me, this is our demo page, so it's defaulting to some of our investigation template questions. But if you were going to create a report, very simple, just a couple of questions to make sure you cover the basics, like what Lisa was talking about, like when did this happen? Who did it happen with, right? So it's going to make sure that you like give some of the basics so you've got those notes. So let's say somebody was having performance issues and at the same time they requested a reasonable accommodation. You're like, okay, my feelers are up. I want to make sure I've got this on record. You as the admin could go in and be like, all right, I got this information. I'm going to put, it was shared with me by the manager. So we'll put the manager name. How would I categorize this concern? We have a bunch of defaults, but you have unlimited customization, so you can create your own categories. I, for the purposes of this demo, created just a couple. So let's say it was reasonable accommodation that we want to put this in. When did it occur, right? So it's going to make sure you cover it. So let's say today, so Thursday, October 24, 2024. Where did it occur? Let's say employee manager one-on-one, right? Again, just very quick notes, what happened, employee requested reasonable accommodations in response to receiving PIP, for example. They got a performance improvement plan. They say, wait, I'd like to request a reasonable accommodation, okay? So common happens. All right, you create the report. So this is actually not the beauty of it. The beauty of it is everything that comes after. So you've got this case now, right? Again, give me one more minute and then I'll end it and we'll go back to Q&A. The beauty of this is now you've got everything perfectly trackable. You can see here, there's an activity log that audits everything you've done on every single day. You've got the information that you put in, which you can edit, of course. You can add notes. So let's say something new happened and you want to track that. So reasonable accommodation decline, employee decline. So maybe the issue, maybe what happened is offered or shared reasonable accommodation paperwork, employee never completed, waited 2 weeks, no response, case closed, or whatever you want to put, right? You save that, right? And what you can do now is you can attach, right? So you could attach a copy of that email. So now you've got everything in one place. So if ever something came up, you now don't have to go and chase everything up and see where everything is. It's all in one place. And if you ever left the company or, somebody else was maybe running reports, like how many reasonable accommodation requests have we had over the course of the year? Or what are the most common employee relations cases that are coming up? You now have a place, right, where everything is tracked in your case management tool, right? You got the full log, you can run reports on it and all. So anyway, I thought I would share that with you all to share. This is what a case management tool looks like. This is Athena's. If you're interested, let us know. We actually always offer special discounts to webinar attendees. So very happy to share more with you about that. And listen, even if you're looking at other case management tools, that's cool too. The point is to help you understand this is what it would look like. And we're happy to answer any questions and share resources about best practices for documentation. We will actually be providing more based on this particular webinar because Lisa, you have shared some gems. All right, all. So for anybody who tuned in for SHRM or HRCR credits, here it is. And then Ace in the background, if you could put up our usual poll, we're going to ask you a couple of questions before we answer your questions, and then we'll kick it off. I'll be quiet for 10 seconds while everybody answers the poll. Okay, I'm gonna assume that was 10 seconds. We have some bangers in this Q&A. I'm gonna actually stop sharing now so that we can all see each other's lovely faces. I usually what I do is like I try to do which ones get the most upvoted. Let's see. Lisa, I'm updating our policies and starting with code of conduct. Are there any tips, ideas on wording around political activity and public expression of personal views? Ooh, spicy one with the elections right around the corner. I hope you're ready, Lisa.
Yes. Well, so before I get into like my short answer, another plug, my colleagues are doing like a full 1 hour webinar on this subject next week. But the very short version of it is we generally don't actually recommend directly addressing political speech in the workplace in your policies, because first of all, how do you even define political speech, right? Like what does that mean? It means something different to everyone. And also like pretty much any way that you define it could actually potentially like impact employees' protected rights to speak about workplace conditions, wages, things like that, right? In fact, there was a case that just came out a while ago where an employer had to pay a bunch of penalties because they took action against an employee who had BLM on their work apron. And it turned out that in that particular case, there had been a history of employees protesting up against what they thought were like racist issues in the workplace. And so in that case, the National Labor Relations Board was like, no, that has to do with workplace conditions. So like that's a perfect example of like if you try to regulate specifically political speech and like how do you define that, right? And so instead we tell employers to like look to your general conduct policies, look to your anti-harassment policies, look to your anti-discrimination policies, and really rely on those to determine whether what an employee is doing is outside the bounds of what you find acceptable in your workplace.
Roger that. Okay, super helpful. I'm glad you touched that one, Lisa, not me. Okay, we have another question for you. It's actually around providing employees the ability to submit incident reports. Okay, I was actually about to say something about Ethena, but okay, before I jump in, I'm just curious, do we have any Ethena customers on the call? If you're an Ethena customer, can you just say like Ethena in the comments? I'm just curious to know if there are any. If there are not, I'll be so sad. We'll see. Oh, yay. Okay, we got a few coming in. Oh, yay, we got quite a ton. Okay, so you all may be familiar with what I will say in a second, but I'm curious to know, Lisa, do we need to provide employees the ability to submit incident reports anonymously, or can it be sent to the company's HR email?
So I think that there are a few laws, I think here and there that do require you to have an ability to submit anonymous complaints. But what I will say is like where it's not specifically required for you, I think generally you want to avoid it. Like not because you want to put employees on the spot and force them to like be, like accountable for what they're saying or anything along those lines, but you as HR folks in a company, you want to be able to resolve these issues. That's the goal of having people report them to you, right? It's not so you can like sit on them and just be aware of them. It's so you can do something to try to fix them. And often the problem that we see with anonymous complaints is that if you don't know where the complaint's coming from, you are missing a lot of information that may allow you to actually resolve the issue. And so if and when you do allow anonymous complaints, one of the things that we also remind people is that like you need to do the best. Like if you can't get further information from that person, you still need to do the best possible investigation you can with the information that you have. And that sometimes includes, if you have a system that allows it, some systems that allow anonymous reports, you can still communicate with the anonymous reporter. And that will allow you to ask them follow-up questions, and they may not participate, but if you can do that, we generally recommend it.
I wholeheartedly agree. And the reason I asked is because for any Ethena customers, you probably are already familiar with this, right? We have exactly that tool, right? It is a hotline. It is an anonymous hotline. People can send things anonymously and you can respond to them anonymously. And I'm even go a step further and say, like, even beyond the scope of like formal investigations and reports, how like annoying is it when you have an all hands where people share anonymous, feedback or like anonymous thoughts, and it's actually It's either like it's too vague, so then you can't address it, or it's, you know, said in like such an unproductive way that you don't want to address it at the company level, so then you say nothing, right? It's so much better when you have a tool that allows you to communicate with people anonymously so that you can choose how you communicate with them directly, company-wide, so on and so forth. And to your point, Lisa, making sure from a legal perspective that you're getting the information that you need. So yeah, it's possible, but like, should you? Maybe not. So consider getting a tool that will help you respond to people who submit things anonymously.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
yeah,
the key, Melanie, like what you were saying, just like when you allow anonymous complaints, have a method by which to communicate back and forth with that person while allowing them to remain anonymous.
love that. I think very important. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Let's see. Which ones do we have? Oh, we have one with a ton of upvotes. Should we consult with lawyers where the employee lives or where they work? We have a lot of employees that live in one state and work in several other states.
Interesting. So generally you should consult with the attorney who you are familiar with, right? Because it will be that attorney's job to figure out what law is going to apply as well, and to connect you with somebody who can advise you on the right state's law. So like, for example, in my firm, like we have lawyers who handle all 50 states. And so when an issue comes up in another state that I don't know the answer to, or maybe it's a multi-state issue and we don't actually, like the law is actually kind of unsettled in a lot of places about like an employee who goes back and forth between states, like which state applies. In some cases, they've said like because the person making the decision is in one state and the person who's impacted by the decision is in another state, like you have to look at both states' laws. That stuff, like that's complicated for lawyers to assess, and like that's gonna drive you all crazy. So I would recommend like just go to the lawyer, the employment lawyer that you know and are comfortable with, and let them figure that issue out.
Oh, love that. Make it somebody else's problem.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Lisa, I'm going to end it on the spiciest possible question. You're going to be like, Melanie, how do you want me to answer this in like 90 seconds? But I saw this and was like, I need to know the answer. What is the guidance on documentation if the business wants to do something that is not legally recommended to cover yourself, but not put the business in a bad place? Or it doesn't matter. Like, what do you document or not document if you're doing a thing that you see and you're like, we shouldn't be doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to give you like the classic lawyer answer of it depends, but it so totally depends. And like, I will tell you, like, not all of the clients that I work with, like, I usually give clients like, here's a bunch of different options, right? And here's like from like the most legally risky to like the least legally risky. And does everyone always choose like the perfectly legally compliant option? Absolutely not, right? And so like that's one of those situations where like if you can, I really recommend that you work with a legal expert to be like, what should be documented here? Because it totally depends on the situation.
Okay, so you got your answer. It sounds like what I'm hearing is you got to hit Lisa up after this, and then Lisa will guide you through it, and you're going to get the answers that you need. Lisa, I want all your help on all the things always.
Anytime.
This has been amazing. All can we get some love for Lisa in the comments? Give her hearts, give her some smileys. Lisa, this was amazing. Thank you so much. As always, I learned so much from you. I'm so excited about all the new resources we're going to be able to provide for employees based on this webinar. Such a pleasure. Any final thoughts before we end the webinar today?
No, I mean, I just like every time I join you, this is the second time, like I've just been really impressed by like how lovely your audience is and how like I see all this like the support for each other in the comments, and I think it's really great. Like I also saw some folks mentioning like I think HR is an underappreciated area, and like it's really important for you all within the community to like be able to support each other, and it's like lovely what you do.
Thank you so much, Lisa. What kind words to end this on. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week, a spooky Halloween if you celebrate, sending all the good vibes your way. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.